Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. First, I would like to welcome Dr. Peter Smagorinsky from the University of Georgia to our seminar today. I'm really honored to have one of my former professors here. And before I introduce Professor Smagorinsky, I would like to tell you that if you need translation to Portuguese, you can choose if you are here on the Zoom to connect in Portuguese or in English for you to receive the translation of the talk. So I'm going to share a little bit about Peter. So Peter Smagorinsky is a distinguished research professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of Georgia, emeritus, and distinguished visit scholar at the University of Guadalajara in Jalisco, Mexico. From 2012 to 2020, he served as the faculty advisor to the student-edited Journal of Language and Literacy Education here at the University of Georgia. And from 1996 to 2003, he co-edited with Michael Smith, Research in Teaching of English. His recent awards include the 2020 Horace Mann League Outstanding Public Educator Award, 2018 International Federation for the Teaching of English Award, and the 2018 Distinguished Scholar Recognition by the National Conference of Research in Language and Literacy. Peter's research and teaching take on a social cultural approach to issues of literacy education, literacy teacher education, and related social concerns. These interests have produced 2020. So last year he published 2 books, both from Bloomsbury, one entitled Learning to Teach English and Language Arts, a Vygotsky perspective on beginning teachers' pedagogical concept development. And then another one co-edited with Yolanda Gayol and Patricia Rosas, Developing Culturally and Historical Sensitive Teacher Education, Global Lessons from a Literacy Education Program. Peter is currently working on another book about the influence of Vygotsky on teaching literature, writing, and language. And I was a student of Peter myself when I joined the editorial board of the Journal of Language and Literacy Education here at the University of Georgia. And I had the pleasure not only to learn more about the publishing world, but also to be inspired by professors who work together with their students to publish. So I really appreciate you being here. Peter, it's a pleasure and welcome to our group. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivi. And let's see. First of all, I would simply like to thank everyone. I see that there are 29 participants now. And I would just like to thank everyone for joining us. It's always an honor to have people interested in our work. And it's very exciting. This is my very first trip to Brazil. And maybe someday I'll actually get there. But it's just really wonderful to have this opportunity to develop these relationships with my Brazilian colleagues. And maybe I'll see you all in, I don't know, Londrina or Buenos Aires or someplace, not Buenos Aires.
São Paulo.
Sao Paulo, sorry. See, I need geography lessons as well as language lessons. I'm trying to learn Spanish and I'm not doing very well. So Portuguese is one more step beyond what I already can't do. So we've had different preparations for this meeting, and there was a talk, the idea when I would talk for 40 minutes and then we'd have question and answer. But I was looking at the questions that some of you posted on the Google Doc, and I just think it would be better if we started there. And I'll probably never get to my talk, And that's always the best kind of session for me, when I never get around to giving my talk, because people are so interested in talking with me, and I'm much more comfortable in a conversation than I am as a speaker, if that makes sense. And I hope that we can, that I'm encouraging you early to interrupt and ask questions and participate. And I hope you speak English, or because
We'll do the translation if needed as well, Peter.
I do. I'm not going to rely on what's being transcribed at the bottom of my screen, because almost nothing is correct. So I'll there's some kind of transcription thing that I have going, but it only does my words. It only does me and not you very well. So again, thanks for being here. And what I'd like to do is go to the Google Doc and look at some of the things you posted here. It's quite interesting. Not only did we have Donald Trump, and now you have Donald Trump, but many of the issues that you're raising in these questions sound so familiar to me. I mean, it's like reading things from my own town. It's remarkable how the world can sometimes run in parallel like this. But I don't know, do you have access to the Google Doc? You do.
Yeah, everybody doesn't. Do you prefer if I share screen, Peter?
Well, I figure that anything that hides my face is probably better for the session. So why don't you share the document, and that way I can, then I don't have to try to find different screens to jump around on.
Oops, sorry.
Yep, very good. That's it. Okay, and I still have a display of the gallery to the right, so I can see some of the faces, not all at once. But is Bianca with us? She's not showing. Oh, there, Bianca Medeiros, is that right?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Hi, Bianca.
Hi, thank you.
I appreciate this question very much, because when I read it, I thought, well, you could write the exact same thing about the United States. So I'll just go through the question. When writing about concepts, you call the reader's attention to the teacher's particular concepts, impressing on students not only an idea, but an ideology. And that's, I would have to say that everything is ideological. And by the way, I'm trying to speak in a slow and clear enough way, and let me know if I start talking too fast or not clearly enough. And so I exemplify it by mentioning a US history textbook. Here in Brazil, we are living in a movement called the No Party School, Escola Sem Partido. Supporters are fighting against teachers' ideologies, especially left-oriented ones, being taught inside classes, using this argument to embarrass, punish, and shame teachers around the country. That's exactly what's going on in the United States. If I may pause here, I know in the state of Arizona, if you mention critical race theory as a teacher, you could get fined $5,000 for mentioning it. It's one of many states, that's probably the worst one, but it's one of many states that is actually punishing teachers for pointing out the truth, which is that this country is deeply racist. It just seems to be patently obvious, but I know someone who watches right-wing news, or Fox News. I hope you don't have it down there. And according to him, there is no racial discrimination in the United States, and Black and brown people are not oppressed in any way. Everything's fair to everybody, and therefore Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, and he used the word evil. Marxism is also evil, according to this person. And that is the message that they get every night on Fox News, on all the right-wing news networks. And indeed, they are, there's this idea that if you're liberal, you're divisive and you are ideological. If you're right-wing, you're just normal. that's the message that comes through pretty consistently in public discourse in the United States. And so I've had a recent experience with a book publisher. So I've got a book that's almost completed that I'm writing with a friend named Allison Scarrett. Allison is at the University of Texas. And the book is about kind of teaching these very difficult issues that we're addressing right now in a kind of even-handed way, if such a thing is possible. But exploring a concept like patriotism. And in the United States, everybody claims to be a patriot, no matter what they believe. And as a result, we have, this speaks to one of the questions that part of what comes up later in this, where the question is, how would Vygotsky's concept theory scaffold a social discussion that supports teachers? You can't have a discussion if people aren't listening to each other. And that's what's happening right now. People aren't listening to each other. And of course, my view is that what they didn't really need to do is listen to me more. But what they think is that I don't listen to them. And the premises that we're arguing from, the history that we're arguing from is all very, very different. And so Donald Trump just this week made a big comment about a statue being torn down in Richmond, Virginia, of Robert E. Lee. And I don't know if you know our history well enough, but Robert E. Lee was the primary general for the Confederate forces in our Civil War. And I grew up in the state that he's from, the state of Virginia. And he was a hero. All of our history books, Robert E. Lee was a great general. He was not really a slave owner. He was just a person fighting for the honor of Virginia. And that was in all of our history books. Turns out that all of that is wrong. He was actually a slave owner. He was a very cruel slave owner. Not only did he have his slaves whipped and beaten, he'd then have what's called brine poured on them. That's salty water, so it would hurt more. And he was a loser, and he was a traitor. He was a traitor because he led a insurrection against the federal government. And he was a loser because he was the architect of the greatest loss of the Civil War, which was the Battle of Gettysburg. And so, but this ideology, this belief was written into the history books, amazingly enough, by the losers. The losers of the Civil War got to write the history, and they were very aggressive with it. And as a result, a lot of people believe that Robert E. Lee was a great American hero instead of a traitor and loser, which is what he was. And therefore they protest removing great giant statues of Robert E. Lee. There was a Robert E. Lee High School in the area that I grew up, although they've changed the name now. They've renamed it after John Lewis, who was a civil rights leader who recently died. But this exact same problem, Bianca's question, again, is so perfect for the United States. Textbooks in the United States bring ideologies usually designed, if they're, I guess you'd call them right-oriented, conservative, because what they try to do is present only, they present mythology. They don't present history. They present a story of how great America is. And they present American history as the triumph of European culture, Western culture, especially over the native people, and then the people that they enslaved. And it's just hard to believe that a great culture would enslave people and conduct genocidal warfare on the native people. But that's the story that's told in our textbooks, because the other story isn't very nice. You know, you would have to learn, geez, we're not that great, really. We're probably better than most, but boy, we have some work to do. And you can't do it unless you get at the truth. But history books in the United States are built on mythology that was deliberately created to obscure the problems of racism that are foundational to this country. A lot of the buildings in this, a lot of the construction of the United States was built by slaves. So yes, and so now if you actually try to get them to teach the truth, they will punish you exactly the way it's written here in the question. And they will fine you and fire you from your job in a lot of places if you go against the grain. And so I was telling you earlier about this book that I'm working on with Alison Scarrett, and it's called Keeping It 100, which means keeping it real or keeping it or making sure that we're dealing with things as they are, not as we wish that they would be. And our editor told us that Fox News had criticized them on the air because they have some program that is designed to promote equity. And they told us to back off. They told us to tone it down, to make it less political, even though, and I agree completely with Bianca, everything is political. You can't have it not be political. So to get to the end of the question, how would you scaffold this discussion? Again, you can't discuss things if you don't listen to each other. And I think that that's a fundamental problem we have here in the United States, that people over here talk, people over here talk, and it all goes like this. It doesn't come together at any point. And they just keep repeating the same things at each other and no one gets anywhere. And these, behind it all, I'm convinced, there's a man named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, and John wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, and he looks at the different, why people from both political, both conservative and liberal ideologies believe that they're right and the other side is wrong. They believe that they're logical and the other side is illogical. They believe that they're reasonable and the other side is emotional. And what Haidt said is, the fact is we're all emotional, that these are highly emotional issues. And that it's not, and it's not that our logic works better than yours, it's that we're all trying to provide rational, what he calls post-hoc rationality. In other words, after you've already arrived at your decision, then you figure out the reasons why. And he grounds it all in emotions, that we feel a certain way. And that's what drives this inability to communicate. So yeah, and it also informs our people that one may not get rid of ideologies that are a social construction. Yes, I would say that's true. The only thing I would be careful about is I've written about Vygotsky and scaffolding. That's a term he doesn't use. That's Jerome Bruner's term. And it's based on a very loose and I would say questionable interpretation of something that Vygotsky wrote in a very small part of this mammoth text production he generated in his lifetime. But this idea that Vygotsky's zone of proximal development equals scaffolding according to Vygotsky isn't true. That's not his word. In the entire corpus of his writing, he uses something that could be translated as scaffolding one time, and that's to describe children, little children, just learning to walk using furniture to hold themselves up. And that is a far cry from what we get in educational literature. Okay, I've talked a lot so far, and what I'd like to do is see if anyone wants to chime in. I know that the chat box has been working away, and I haven't been able to follow it. So who would like? Is there anyone who'd like to jump in. And Vivi, the screen grab that you did, the screen share you did is making it so I can't see the gallery anymore.
Vivi, fecha pouquinho.
Okay,
That's better.
thank you.
Of course.
Okay, I can't read a lot of what's in the chat box. So is there anyone who wants to speak?
May I jump in? Yes. Hi, Peter. I'm
Hi.
Monica Lem. I'm one of Fernanda's students.
Uh-huh. Oh, hi, Monica.
I just had this discussion with Bianca this afternoon. It happens that we work together.
Mhm.
And while listening to you and trying to get things together, what you said and what I discussed with Bianca, it's interesting to notice that one thing is when we notice these differences or these historical mistakes in didactic books or history text, I mean, the textbooks or history books, or even on names of the streets when we were walking around, or statues around the city. But when we see this in the discourse of people inside schools, it seems we were asking ourselves, where was the mistake? You know, we've been working with intervention research for over 20 years in this research group led by Fernanda and Cisa. And then it's a bit like this, I don't know if disappointing is the best word, but it makes us think deep inside. What is the turning point, you know? Because again, one thing it's when the other is saying, or the politicians are saying, or the history is showing us, and then we have the chance to correct or to fix things or to build up another history. Another thing is when we are in the midst of this turmoil inside working settings, or especially schools, where we are supposed to develop minds and work together and think forward. So it's just a comment on what you said and about your text and things we've been going through.
Well, I'll confess that I'm very ignorant about Brazilian history. I've been working in Mexico for about 5 years now, and I've read a lot of Mexican history, and it makes me realize how completely ignorant I am about most of the world, because there's Mexico right next door, and I had no idea how it became modern Mexico. But in the United States, and this is mainly what I can speak to, in the United States, after our Civil War in 1860 to 1864, the losing side rewrote that whole history and made it and institutionalized it. And the way you begin to understand that the idea of the best ideas winning is wrong. It's the most powerful ideas that make it, and power is not necessarily related to quality. And so there was a group of Southerners who managed to retell the entire story of the South and get it put into textbooks. And because the textbook market depends on states like Texas and all the South to sell their books, they have to compromise with those states over what goes in them. It's not the best ideas. It's the ideas that have the most authority behind them, in the sense of being forced, in the sense of power. And so I can trace it very easily in the United States. It was after the Civil War, the Daughters of the American Confederacy made sure that monuments to all the Southern generals and racists and slave owners went up, and the stories began to be told about their glory, how wonderful they were, and how the it's called the lost cause. It was a good, in this conception, it was a good fight. They just happened to lose. And it's hard to look at it and think it was a good fight, because the whole purpose of it was the basis of it was the perpetuation of slavery. And the modern apologists for the South say, oh no, it was never about slavery. My great-great-great-grandfather was poor. He didn't have slaves. Therefore, I'm not part of the problem. But of course, they still benefit from the institution that keeps a whole race down. You have to ignore a lot in order to perpetuate that line of thought. So, but I think it's a very interesting question. If there is mythology instead of history in your textbooks, how to get there, who put it there, who allowed this to happen? And I think a lot of it is just in the name of nationalism. In other words, what helps us create the best story about our country? What helps instill young people with a sense of loyalty and patriotism? In the United States, at the beginning of the school day, kids put their hands over their hearts and say the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. That is a medium through which patriotism is supposedly generated in young people. And then later, they learn that that stuff isn't true if they pay attention. And then what I think that what happens is you become disappointed in your country because it's not the place you always thought it was. Now, it helped me again, I know the United States, I know a bit about Mexico, I know a bit about the Soviet Union. These are, if I were to give the talk that I brought, I would talk about those countries, because in all three of those nations, the whole purpose of public schooling was to socialize people into a national identity. That's why we have mass education in the United States. It wasn't so that everybody learned math. It was so everyone learned how to be an American. And the mass education in the US was instituted in the 1850s. A man named Horace Mann was generally credited for creating a whole mass education system. And in the mid-1800s in the United States, we were experiencing a great immigration wave, especially from European countries in the Scandinavian area. And these waves of people speaking Finnish and Norwegian and German and Gaelic and from south of there, how do you take all these people and form them into Americans? That was the question. It was prompted by a huge immigration wave and the effort to expand the United States westward. And school was the medium through which all these different people in their childhood were socialized into an American identity, speaking the same language, saluting the same flag, saying the same Pledge of Allegiance, and all becoming Americanized. So there's a homogenizing purpose behind public education, and it serves national interests. And that's why I think it's hard to be really multicultural, even though this country is filled with all different sorts of people. Multiculturalism is difficult to do in school, even though we talk about it in universities. In schools, it all gets laid on top of this stabilizing institution, one that's designed to perpetuate the way they are and to make everybody feel good about being an American. And multiculturalism tends to be very critical of that, right? Multiculturalism says, wait, you're a bunch of colonists, and there are questions down the page about colonizing. You're taking us, you're forcing us to give up who we are in order to become who you are. That's the general feeling, and from the standpoint of the status quo, the answer is, yep, that's right. We're going to make you better by making you more like us. And again, this is built into schooling. And so all these, one thing I've looked at a lot of what we call mission statements for schools, the little 2 or 3 sentences that says, we value all children and blah, 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 blah. They all talk about diversity and inclusion. And then that's all laid on top of an institution that's designed to be monocultural, to eliminate diversity. And that's why we have standardized curriculum in the United States. We have standardized assessment. We have efforts to punish people for saying anything else. I don't know if we have these Chicano populations here, especially in the Southwest. There was a big problem in Arizona where they tried to have a curriculum, I forget what it was called, but it was sort of a brown people pride, Latin American, asserting the pride and the value of the Latin cultures that were in the Southwest, and the politicians did everything they could to crush it. So there you go. I see some people chatting. Is anyone who wants to jump in?
Yeah, hi Peter, can I jump in? Thanks for this great conversation. In the chapter you shared with us, you talked a little bit about the fact that teachers probably have the issue with teaching education is not as much excessive theory, but not enough concept.
Right.
And that's what it would probably influence teachers transforming like 3 months after they leave university, like they have all this theory, all these discussions at the university, they learn so much, and then 3 months inside a school they are using the books the way they used when they were children, so could you, and I think that has a lot to do with what you were saying in terms of discourses that are more powerful,
Exactly. Yeah.
so could you talk a little bit more about that on your, based on your experience, how we could provide teachers with more opportunities to understand and to leave concepts, as a way to fight, let's say, this more powerful discourses?
Well, you've connected the dots, as we say, perfectly between what I was saying a moment ago and your observation.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I jump in with my
Yeah, please
question
do.
as well,
Yeah.
Peter? Because it's very much connected, so you can answer both together. Do you mind?
No, please do.
Yeah, because my question was exactly about this thing about the difference between theory and practice and scientific and everyday concept. And we've been discussing this so much in our ways of understanding what we teach and how we teach, and what comes from this idea that there are some concepts that would be considered scientific and academic and school-like, and other knowledge that is considered less. So it may not look like the same discussion, but I think that they are very much connected, because what is considered scientific is the knowledge of the colonizers. Colonizers, I'm not talking about England and the States or Portugal and Brazil, but I'm talking about those who dominate, who control the power of what we teach, how we live, the values we have, and what is to be considered teachable. It's just like the same as who is considered grievable, what is considered good enough or good or bad in teaching. So if you could put these two things together, I would love it.
Okay, well, I'll try. Because it would just unpacking what the two sets of comments that I think it was Larissa and Fernanda just provided. I think it goes back. Let me. Somebody on the Google document asked me to speak about historicity, and I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. But I do want to historicize. Okay, who was that?
It's Monica.
Oh, it's Monica. Okay, well, thank you, because those are. I wasn't sure what you meant, but history is really important. If you Vygotsky's theory is generally known as a cultural historical theory. And there are two different histories. One is the kind of the broad history, and then there's the history of the individual growing up within a cultural context. So this idea of a cultural historical theory kind of forces you to look at how schools came to be the way they are. And I gave a very, very quick version of what mass education is for. And it's still for that. It's still a socializing, homogenizing medium. It's designed to take people like my grandparents who were immigrants and make them Americans as fast as possible. Now it's designed, well, now other laws are designed to keep people from coming here at all, but we still have all different sorts of people here, and the many, many efforts at standardization in the United States. And again, I don't know how familiar you are with them all, but the Common Core state standards, the names give it away. Standardized testing, centralized curriculum. It all speaks to the effort to homogenize, make it all uniform. When I was a teacher, I had a superintendent say, if you're teaching 9th grade English, everybody in the English department should be doing the exact same thing on March 3rd. That we should all be doing the same thing to give everybody the same thing, instead of having you and me and everybody else do what we're good at or work to our strengths or do different things so that we can have some fertilization across ideas. And to me, that's much more interesting than homogenization. In fact, one of the key ideas in Vygotskyan thought comes from Hegel, and it's the idea of there being a thesis, an antithesis, and then it's the kind of grinding together of these two, the exchange between these two that produces something new, the synthesis. But you can't have that unless they truly engage, right? So when I was talking before about conservatives and liberals, you can't have a synthesis when things never engage, when they never meet each other on each other's terms. You have to be able to listen to what they're actually saying. In fact, one of the kind of difficult things and often aggravating things about reading Vygotsky is he spends so much time taking apart his contemporary thinkers. In fact, you'll be reading along and he'll say, according to Stern or according to Kafka or somebody like that, blah, 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 blah. And you're thinking, well, this makes sense. This makes sense. And then he'll say, of course, they're completely wrong about everything. And they go, oh, you just did all this underlining and trying to understand it. And then you find out that he says, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They're completely wrong. How could anyone believe such a preposterous thing? And sometimes his arguments are so hard or are so sharp and pointed and often very aggressive that someone like Piaget, they actually had a lot more in common than our lore has produced. Vygotsky was much more biological than is credited for, and Piaget was more social than he was credited for. Plus, a lot of what people like me know about Piaget comes from Vygotsky's critiques, but this was when they were both in their 30s. So, and then Piaget lived forever. He was, I think, 80 something when he died. And Vygotsky died at 37. So we have a very limited view. When I think of what I thought when I was 35 years old, I think, oh boy, I'm glad no one knows about that. Boy, was I dumb. Because I was learning, I was figuring it out. I was going through this dialectic process, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's the Hegelian dialectic. I was going through this, and not nearly to the point of synthesis. In fact, I'm still at the level of trying to figure it out, and that's why I continue to read. I can't remember what I was starting with on that, but then I know where I ended up, but I'm not sure where it came from. Oh, we were talking about the importance of history, of understanding how schools came to be. And whether teacher education has even the capacity to break through. Is that the essence of that sort of question? What can teacher education do when schools are constructed to do something else? And I believe that that's a big part of the problem. Again, very few people in a college of education in teacher ed would say, yes, I am going to train people to fit in and never ask any questions. That's rarely what anyone in higher education would say, in teacher education. What they say is, you know, we're gonna change the world, we're gonna reform, we're gonna liberate people, we're gonna make schools fair and equitable. And that's not what schools are built for. And as a result, a lot of what we do troubles us because we're preparing people for schools that don't really exist. And that's frustrating. It was a major source of frustration for me as a teacher educator, wondering, I wonder if anyone's ever gonna get to do anything. All they're doing is following scripts in schools. They're following orders. And in Georgia, they'll get fired if they don't. So how about if I offer that and see if anyone wants to jump in? If not, we've got a Google Doc with lots more on it.
Peter, could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
No, this is Julie Hanks. I'm from the University
hi, Julie.
of Illinois. Yeah,
Nobody knows this, but I used to work with Julie's dad.
I'm sorry, say that again, Peter.
I used to work with Julie's father at the University of Oklahoma.
Yes, absolutely. It made me think of that when I was reading your article and seeing your little history, which I love. I love that part of your, prologue to the chapter we read. So, yeah, and my dad, as people know, he was in education and focused on organizational issues in the history of education. So that was interesting. But I'm just fascinated with your using and focusing on the notion of concepts in relation to theory and or in addition to. And I know one of the things I often talked about, I did training for clinicians, was trying to get people to think about concepts as their thinking tools. And I think that fits a lot with what your chapter was saying, and that you were challenging us as both training student teachers or clinicians and teachers themselves to reflect on those tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
To think about what they are, understand them, and engage with them and deploy them. I wonder, is that part of your partial solution to how we move forward from here?
Well, I wish I had a partial solution. I'm really
glass half full here, Peter. Glass half full.
Glass half full. Okay, I'll shoot for the partial solution. So, are you asking whether concepts solve all the problems?
No, not at all. I'm never so positive. My glass isn't that full.
Okay.
So no, but more thinking that we have to have ways of moving forward and engaging with this. And if there are thinking tools, and we're supposed to be thinking about how, as novice teachers, they're going to go out and face these environments. Yeah. Building those tools is really important. So reflecting on the concepts, understanding the concepts, knowing where they came from, owning the concepts, right? Is that part of the process?
Well, it depends on whether they're ever allowed to use them. And this is the frustration. I think most people come out of teacher ed programs with stuff to do, with practical ideas that are, and one thing that's stressed over and over and over in Vygotsky's writing, and I'm rereading all of the collected works to write this new thing I'm working on. And one of the things that Vygotsky, I'll show you this. I don't know if you can see this is Collected Works Volume 3. So I just finished rereading this and now I'm going through and looking at my notes and taking notes from my notes. At some point in here, Vygotsky says the most important issue, the most important factor in education is the structure of the school. It's not about what the teacher does. It's about what the school is structured and organized and designed to do that matters more than anything. And unfortunately, I think that's true. And so it doesn't so much negate what the individual teacher can do, but it does shape what the individual teacher can do. And there are things that you just can't do. In certain schools in Georgia, you know, we might say, oh, it's important to help kids understand gender roles. When you talk about them in some of the schools in Georgia, you won't have a job the next day. You know, they're just not designed to accommodate that sort of thinking. So there are the conception that, you know, we tend to have a progressive orientation and in teacher education. And by progressive, I mean kind of grounded, at least in the US, in the ideas of John Dewey, learning by doing, activity, not activity theory, but, you know, classroom activity, learning through doing things. And in a lot of classrooms, you can't, there's not much space for it. So again, what happens, it's the fundamentally different cultures of schools, broadly speaking, and colleges of education, broadly speaking, is that they value different things. And the fact is, the schools are the ones who get to decide who works in them. They get to decide who they're going to hire. They get to decide who they're going to keep. And that's what people gravitate to. They gravitate to the greatest form of security. You can't have a teaching job if you're fired. It's actually, in here, if you get fired, it's hard to get another job. It's hard to get another teaching job because the administrators then explain to each other how dangerous you are. So Julie, the question is so vexing to me because I don't have a way out. And I spent my whole career trying to find one. There was a study I did going back 20 years now, but it could have happened 40 years ago, where the beginning teacher said, well, you know, we're going to kind of undo all the mistakes of the older people. You know, we're going to go in, we're going to change the schools, blah 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 blah. And I said, that's interesting. That's what I said in 1976 when I started teaching, and nothing's changed. So these are very entrenched cultures in schools that are designed for homogenization, not multiculturalism. They're designed for compliance, not free thinking. You know, they're structured according to bells. I'm not sure how else you would do school other than having classes and bells. I'm not sure what the way out of that is, especially in a big school. But you'd almost have to go rebuild schools from the ground up and have them rebuilt by people in colleges of education. And periodically people do that. Oh, I'm going to go start my own school. I couldn't start my own school because I wouldn't know how to run one. That's not what I'm built for. But there are people who I think would much rather go build a school, you know, start a school than sit around in on a university faculty and talk about what schools should be doing. And I think one of the problems in teacher ed is that we don't have to deal with the problems. They're really somebody else's. They're the school's problems, not ours. So we can be free to suggest all these cool things. We just don't have to put them into practice. It's very it's frustrating. You know, this is frustrating work.
Yeah, unless you do the work with the schools, you can isolate yourself from that. I agree.
Well, by and large, you then have to fit in with them. They can ask you to leave. You can't ask them to leave.
I think that, as Catherine Walsh says, sometimes we can have the cracks on the wall. We have, for example, Susan here. Perhaps you could say a little bit about how you deal with that, because Susan works for a very wealthy school in Brazil, and her dissertation is precisely about how to create cracks in the wall when you are teaching the elite. And on the other hand, we have Sandra Santella here, who is a coordinator at a public school in a very poor outskirts of in neighborhood, and they're all trying hard to break with this tradition of this is the content and these are the scientific concepts that we need to teach, and we will not do it in an intercultural way. So it is challenging, it is dangerous, and it's daring, as Anna Stetsenko says, but I think people have been trying. And I would ask Susan to say a little bit, because I think it's important.
Sure, of course. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Peter. Yesterday, coincidentally, I was talking to a teacher at our school. She comes from the northern part of Brazil, from Pará, and she was brought up in a riverside community, uma comunidade ribeirinha do Pará. So when she was a young girl, there wasn't any plumbing where she lived, and everything, you know, at her school, there wasn't a library, so everything was done through oral language. So quite primitive, if we can use that word in that sense. But I was visiting the school with a group of teachers from the US, from Orlando, and one of the teachers asked our teacher, Raquel, so Raquel was telling her story that she came from Pará, then she came to the state of São Paulo. She's been living in São Paulo for many years, and she's been working at our school for 16 years. And so this teacher who was visiting asked Raquel, you know, what keeps you at the same school for such a long time? Wow. And Raquel said, well, it's very rewarding for me when I talk to my students, because she's an early childhood educator, and she works with building literacy skills through storytelling and through playing games and talking about indigenous people, and and talking about culture, Brazilian culture, and so when she said, when I talk to my former students, when they're, you know, now in year 8 or year 9, and they see me and they remember the things I used to, you know, the things we used to talk about and play together, that is so rewarding to me. I feel that I belong here and that I make a difference, and that my students, they see life differently. Well, a little bit, you know, there's a little bit of me or the interaction we had in them. So, and that was just a testimonial. And then towards the end of the visit with this group of teachers from Orlando, they said, Susan, I have to say, of all the schools we visited on our trip here, I feel that your school is the one where I can see that teachers and students feel the most engaged and the most, like they really participate and they're creative and they own what they're doing. So of course it's dangerous in a sense. We have to be careful. Fernanda says that she knows that I'm not nearly as outspoken as she is. I have to be very careful because of the position I'm in. But I look for these cracks in allowing the teachers to really bring in their different cultures and to interact and affect, you know, the children and the learners in many different ways. And so, yeah, I think that's what I can say.
Right. Well, I'm happy to hear that. First of all, and you know, as I'm thinking as you're speaking, I may the fact that I've been living in the South, I've lived most of my life in the U.S. South, and it's more conservative than other places, and so there probably are places that have greater latitude. But I would say the national problem is that standardization and homogenization remain entrenched as part of the mission of American schools. And to the point, and I don't know if you're familiar with Mariana Souto Manning, who's a Brazilian educator at Teachers College in New York. She got her degree in my department, and we're still good friends. And she and I disagree on something, because I've said that we have something called student teaching, where, you know, they go spend a semester or a year in schools being under the mentorship of a practicing teacher. From what I can tell, what that mainly serves to do is undo everything you're doing in teacher education, because you're taking them and putting back in schools that are exactly like the ones they went to, and that have formed their primary socialization to education, and then they're putting back where all those values are reinforced. Some of them even go back to the same school that they graduated from to do their student teaching and get their jobs. Mariana disagrees with me, and I think that there are a couple reasons. One is she has a tremendous amount of energy for what she does. She's also in New York City, where you have a lot more niches. You have there's a lot more variety just in the people. And I don't know how the New York City schools operate, but our big urban school systems tend to have a lot of poverty and a lot of challenges. And my experience teaching has been that the less people expect of your students, the more you can do as a teacher. That's one reason I always taught low-level classes, was because no one cared about them, and I could teach the way I wanted to. And they were in many ways my most satisfying classes. You know, sort of the higher up you get into our tracking system, the more like a college teacher you have to be, which is the more kind of talk-oriented and canonical in your operation of the curriculum. So there may be, you know, it may be that our situations are very different, but in my experience here in Georgia, the longer a teacher candidate is in schools, the less value teacher education has, because they get absorbed back into that culture. And I think Vygotsky was exactly right. The most important issue is the whole school culture, much more important than having a teaching technique.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to jump in? You can always go back to the Google Doc.
I'll open it again.
Okay.
For us.
There's a lot of good stuff in there. We're still kind of on the first question.
That's right.
Second question was written by me, and I think you have spoken about that now, Peter.
Okay.
Because I was thinking about how to prevent the quick gravitation to negative norms and practices. So I'm working with teacher candidates now, and they go to the schools.
Yeah.
And sometimes what I'm feeling is that some of these teachers, especially the ones that have more experience, more than 1 or 2 year experiences already in teaching, and are pursuing the teaching certificate, they feel they already know the concepts, so they are not willing to discuss them. They're feeling exasperated or underwhelmed when there are discussions about concepts that they believe they are already familiar with, because they have been teaching and they some of them say they are applying those concepts. So it's just more a way of thinking about how to engage these teachers to continue working on what we are doing in their education programs, right?
It's interesting how the question is phrased, because quick gravitation to negative norms and practices. So there's a judgment there of that what's going on in school is negative, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I decided to use negative practices, but I know that sometimes they can gravitate to positive practices. In schools that are doing work that is different, but what I mean by this is to replicate what the other teacher is doing, because they are observing one teacher for a whole year, and then sometimes if that teacher already has a program, lessons, just replicating that. That's why I said negative.
And in my view is I would characterize them perhaps more politically than qualitatively. In other words, I would say these are designed to conserve, and rather than saying that they're, and that's positive to almost everyone in a school. So that's from the standpoint, I think you've positioned universities and schools according to how they would judge each other, because they often look at what we're doing and saying, that's a bunch of garbage. That's stupid. You know, why would anyone do that? Why would anyone want to engage in critical inquiry and criticize us? But the first part of the question, how to encourage student teachers to continue debating teaching methods. And Vivi, if you could help me, are you speaking of education in Georgia or Brazil?
In Georgia.
Okay, so, and that's foreign language education or?
Yes, so I'm teaching the methods course for foreign language teachers in Georgia.
Okay.
And they are observing, they're working with teachers in service. Some of them are already teachers themselves, teaching in the schools. Yeah.
So I guess the first thing I would say is it probably depends on what subject you're teaching, because I don't think you'd teach a foreign language the same way you'd teach literature. Unless, even if you use literature to teach a foreign language, I think that the purpose for it would be different than it would be for teaching people who already speak the language how to engage with their, usually a national literature and language. But so I know my own field. I wouldn't know how to teach math in 100 years, in part because I wouldn't know what the right answers are. You have to know something about what you're teaching. I'm much more comfortable talking about the teaching of what we call English, which is literature, writing, and language study. Although those have been expanded. Writing now is viewed as among the semiotic tools available rather than the only one, which is the way it was for a long time. But one way, to answer this in a very practical way, one of the ways of teaching that I've always used is the use of what we call scenarios, or short examples. But if you are to describe like 4 different ways of teaching people how to write a narrative, or 5 different ways of how to teach students how to write an argument, and make sure that they're distinct, because there are many ways you can do this, and have them talk about what they think of them, usually driven by their own experiences. And what, if you go back to this whole idea of spontaneous and scientific or academic knowledge, that's the sort of thing that will inevitably require them to draw on their everyday knowledge, their experiences. But they would have to put it in the context of this broader question of what a teaching method is. And to me, this is a very it's a way that you're kind of, you're structuring an activity so that they almost can't avoid talking about the abstraction, the method, whatever scaffolding is, and then tying it to how they've been taught, tying it to how have they learned. And how they've learned is a very local issue. That's what they've experienced. That's why it's called that. Well, I don't know if the terms are very good, spontaneous or everyday. It's what you learn without being taught how to do it. It's what you learn, or at least without being taught formally how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And knowledge of that sort tends to be local. And I've always used gardening examples. I'm a gardener. And if I applied the lessons in Georgia to what I learned about gardening in Oklahoma, all of my plants would die because the culture here is different. The environmental culture is very different.
The soil.
And so, yeah, the soil is different. The amount of sunshine you get is different. The amount of rain you get is different. All these things are different. So if I only knew about gardening based on living in Oklahoma and I moved to Georgia, I would kill everything because I didn't have the ability to kind of step back and say, instead of having to water everything, I might think, what is the role of water in an ecosystem?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a bigger question that enables me to think about watering in different regions of the country.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know our country, Oklahoma is arid, hot, dry, and Georgia is also hot, but it's much wetter. So go ahead.
We have so many questions, very interesting questions in here. But I know we don't have a lot of time. We have about 20 minutes. So let my colleagues maybe decide which questions.
How about, I'm more than happy to go that way. Does anyone want to pick a line of inquiry for us to walk down the last 20 minutes or so?
I'll show them. So we have
Maybe perhaps people who are here and who wrote the questions, they could speak up and ask their questions.
Yeah.
What about anyone who would like to?
Remember, you can ask the questions in Portuguese and then we have the interpreters. So come on, everybody.
Yeah.
Or I can just jump into one of them.
Yeah. Monica, don't you want to ask yours?
we discussed hers. I think, right, Monica? The concept.
Yeah.
Oh, we've streamed a lot of these. A lot of these questions have enough of a
Yeah, I think
thread
they were
across.
intertwined
Yeah.
with the answer, right?
So, but I would love to look at the one, not number 3. Vivi, could you scroll down a little bit? Oh, and just by the, as I'm looking at that one, scroll by, someone asked, but what do I mean by multiple means of mediation? So the mediators are those factors that that I guess shape how you conduct yourself. And so in school, let's take the person coming out of the teacher education program. And they might have learned, oh, I'm going to use small groups and I'm going to, they learned a progressive teaching ideology. That is a mediator. That is the lens through which they see how to teach. But then they'll go into a school and they're required to do a lot of standardized test preparation. So there are multiple means of mediation that often are in conflict with one another, and resolving them in order to do so with conceptual unity is almost impossible. It's almost impossible to be a consistent human being. That's one of the points I picked up from reading about evolutionary psychology, is that there is so much going on in the world. The world is such a big, complicated place, and we now have access to so much of it that you can't be consistent because you're surrounded by discourses telling you different things all the time. And this is one of the puzzles of teacher educators who see their own teachers out in the field, is that they seem to be doing very inconsistent things. And then they'll critique them for being inconsistent. And what I would say is, it's the setting that is inconsistent. It's the environment that is inconsistent. And they're trying to operate within it and navigate the different demands that it makes on them, even when they're inconsistent. And so teachers will often say, this is so common in a literature class, I want them all to come up with their own interpretations, and I want them to get the right one too. And the right one is the one that they learned in college. So those are two diametrically opposed ways of thinking about literature, getting the right answer and having a free reader response environment. And can you do both? I doubt it, but teachers are in the bind of trying to serve both masters at once.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just to make a comment, Peter, on my question, when I used the word negative, I was also thinking about this difference between reproducing what is already there or going to the school and making change, because I also agree with you in the power of the teacher education programs to train, and training is not the best word, but like first discuss these concepts and then prepare these teachers to be the agents of change when they go to the schools. And we want to see that movement going, and I agree that we need much more than us teachers ourselves. We need to transform the system, but we should have that hope.
Well, because the schools aren't built for change. And so, we're trying to get them to be change agents in institutions that are very, very resistant to change. I was going to be a change agent, and mostly what I did was get in trouble. I was a teacher. Administrations always thought I was a pain in the ass, as have deans in my colleges of education, by and large, considered me to be a big thorn in their side. But I was also in situations that allowed me to be that person, and other people were far more intimidated. And you could look at it as gender. I'm a white male. I'm a very big white male. You can't see it here, but I'm 6'5". I'm a big guy. And, being a big white guy does enable you to say things that being a small woman doesn't in a lot of situations. And that's not my judgment. That's how I've experienced the world. And what I've been told over and over again, well, you're privileged. Well, I couldn't do that. You're privileged. And I'm not going to argue against that because so many people have told me that over the years. So, I don't want to come across as too kind of what the word is pat in English, where everything is kind of neat and tidy. I don't want to be too much like that. On the other hand, I do think that these broad generalizations are there. Progressive college of education, conservative school. We're trying to move these people in there to change them, but they don't want to change. And historically, that's been their mission, to perpetuate and socialize, not to change. And that actually, I think, could tie into this fourth one. And I don't know what you're familiar with from what I've read, but the last 10 years or so, I've been writing about autism. I'm actually on the autism spectrum. My daughter is on the autism spectrum. I'm pretty sure my father was on the autism spectrum. My nephew is very autistic. It runs in my family. And so I have a combination of traits of being, it's more Asperger's syndrome than autism, but both are very focused ways of being, in many cases too focused. But I also have something called obsessive compulsiveness, and I'm highly anxious. So I take medications. If I were down in Brazil giving this talk, I would have to take a lot of drugs. If I were to to come down to Brazil, I would have to take a lot of drugs just to get on the plane. I depend on drugs to manage anxiety. The irony is that all these things are called disorders, and I've argued that they're the reason I'm good at my job, because they just give me this kind of this power drive to do things that is very different from the way most people I know are put together. And I've called it my Asperger's advantage, that I am mentally ill in 3 different ways. And together they produce a very productive personality, but that doesn't mean that they're not disadvantages in some contexts. All right. I'm not a very good fighter sometimes because I get really angry. And, it's just not, there are certain things you don't want me doing because of this combination of traits. So because I've learned so much about my own makeup, and I learned all this when my daughter was hospitalized several times for being out of control with more or less the same package of conditions. I've lost that. That's okay. So I began trying to understand what mental health is and what being different is, because again, schools don't like things that are different. They like everything to be the same. So they might talk about diversity, but they're not very good at it. The idea of diversity is you become more like us. But Vygotsky, it turns out, is one of the most productive thinkers about special education in the history of the field. It's not all that well known, but he was involved in a great field with a bad name. The name is defectology. This was something they inherited from the Germans, who came up with the idea. And defectology was, how do we understand people's defects? At least in its original conception. And when Vygotsky got hold of it, it became, I think this is some of the greatest stuff he's ever written. His volume 3 of the collected works it's all about defectology. And I avoided it for years because I hated the name. And I even went to Russia one time, and we were taken to a school of defectology. And I thought, why are we here? There's got to be something interesting going on. And really all we did was walk through a building. We didn't see anything special going on. But the notion behind Vygotskyan defectology is he was concerned with blind, deaf, and mentally impaired children. The Soviet Union was born into a very disruptive world. And this is one of those things that I didn't quite put together until fairly recently. In the middle of World War I, they overthrew their own government. In the middle of a world war, that's what the Bolshevik Revolution was, 1917. In the middle of World War I, and they got rid of, and the Romanovs, the Tsars, were horrible people, and they were a monarchy and wanted it to stay that way. Anyhow, so they were overthrown. But then there were. So 1914, the beginning of World War I, 1917, Bolshevik Revolution, 1919, World War I ends. But after the overthrow of the government, it wasn't as though Lenin just stepped in. There were about 5 years of civil wars, because all they did in overthrowing the Romanovs was create a vacuum. And then that's what the Cossacks were trying to restore Tsarist rule. There were just different people trying to fill that void, and ultimately the communists did. But it was almost a decade of constant warfare, and it was warfare where people were just getting blown up. And so at the beginning of the Soviet Union, they had the same homogenization goal as the United States, but to build a communist society and to take all the 45 languages or whatever it was and homogenize it. The Soviet Union stretches across something like 10 time zones. It's this mammoth place. And they wanted to evolve the new Soviet man, as they called it, through education. Education was the prime medium. So they were trying to force start a new evolution. It was very Darwinian. They were trying to evolve a new type of human in a very short period of time, which is one reason Stalin had to kill 10 million people. They didn't quite fit. So the collusion between killing people and educating people was going to produce this whole new culture. So the challenge to schools then was not just to homogenize, but to what do you do with all these kids who are deaf now? What do you do with these kids who are blind now? And that's where Vygotsky applied these ideas behind defectology. And his claim is, he really reiterates this over and over. Being blind is not a problem for the blind person. It's a social problem. The problem is, how do we educate everybody else about blindness so that blind people can live a more fulfilled life? And blind, deaf, all the different absences from the conventional makeup. It was all about, how do the rest of us change? Not how do we fix these broken people, but how do the rest of us create environments that make it possible for them to participate? Mm-hmm. And this idea of participating in streams of cultural activity as a way to feel better about yourself, feel like a contributing member of society, when I read about this, I think, God, that's so uplifting. What a fantastic way to think about people who are different. It's not just inclusion, it's changing the so-called normal people. How do they change to make it life better for other people who don't have the full array of evolutionary features in the human body? And honestly, it's really uplifting. Now, it has its downside in that the cultural streams that Vygotsky described, and he was very excited about this, the young pioneers and the young communists. These were actually organizations designed to help young people participate in the Soviet experiment, because this was the first communist nation, right? That no one had ever done this before. The problem is, under Stalin, everything came to serve Stalin's ends, not society's ends. And so the young pioneers and the young communists, instead of becoming the socializing medium to evolve the new Soviet man, these kids were ratting out their parents when the parents did things that Stalin wouldn't like. So he actually turned them into a bunch of tattletales. Because that was his notion of patriotism and loyalty, was to him. So the defectology ran into the Soviet, what happened to the Soviet Union under Stalin, which to me was all bad. But I still believe that the general principles of seeking to create better environments that enable full participation is an incredibly progressive idea. And he thought of this 100 years ago. It sounds so fresh and new. It's 100 years old, and it's probably very hard to do, but I completely believe that's, if there's a problem with, I don't know, deafness, the problem is with the rest of us, because we're not working hard enough on creating better environments. And again, that's inspiring. So I noticed we're getting on to the end of the session.
Peter?
No, and I just saw, yes, Trump and Stalin and Bolsonaro are the same person. Yes.
Peter, I just thought that perhaps Elias could say something, because his doctor dissertation is exactly about this and the spaces that are created for deaf teachers.
Oh, really?
places. So perhaps he could say something to us. Monica, could you do the other way around and then translate to Peter, or is that impossible? Or someone,
This
Elias,
is what we
You
do
mean
in
me
common-
or the Monica translator?
the translator, but I think it's going to
Okay.
be difficult for her to do the other way around. So if you can do, Monica, Elias,
Okay.
Then alguém
consegue?
explica em português.
Põe no português, aí a Mônica faz e você faz em português. Você faz em inglês. Não? Não sei. Você consegue, Mônica,
Ok.
mudar? Ok, Elias.
Bom, então vou falar um pouco, né, com vocês. Primeiramente, quero agradecer pelas apresentações que vocês fizeram, são explicações muito boas, contribuem demais com os estudos, e conforme Vygotsky explicou, né, ele falou as reflexões que ele fez na época, todas as perspectivas que ele teve, todos os problemas que ele enxergou, os caminhos que ele trilhou, fizeram com que se desenvolvessem, né? Lógico que ele usa esse termo, né, de ser defeituoso, mas o pensamento que está por trás, a prática envolvida, né, que ele pensou para a sala de aula, para as escolas, a gente percebe que para o surdo, para o cego, né, para a comunidade em geral, já se via que para o tempo e para a época dele era muito desenvolvido. Foi
Elias,
feito já.
a Lúcia está pedindo para abaixar a câmera, que ela não está conseguindo enxergar
Posso
Pra
falar
Lúcia.
até aqui?
É bom, né? É melhor você
Só
fazer.
para eu me perder. So, Peter, first, Elias is thanking all of us and you for all the reflections and all the great contributions we've been through. And he says that Vygotsky raised important reflections on like the problems, the perspective, and the pathways of defectology. And even though it has this not so good name, the defectology, he says that his thinking and practice for that time was of great contribution for the deaf and blind community. And despite having this name and despite being that time, it was already very developed.
Vou continuar, então. Vocês conseguem me ver bem? Sim? Ok.
Ficar com a Lúcia. A Lúcia que tem que dizer, porque ela tem que ver se ela vê a mão. Ela disse que tudo bem, agora sim.
Para o tempo dele, né, para a época dele, o desenvolvimento que ele teve, todas as suas perspectivas, seus pensamentos, estratégias de ensino, davam para perceber que dentro das as escolas russas, né, ela tinha as oportunidades e experiências que ele percebia. Dentro dessas pesquisas, né, de tudo que a gente pode ver que ele escreveu, de tudo que ele recolheu de informações, mostram que não é um pensamento que veio de inclusão pronto. Ele foi construindo esses pensamentos já desde aquela época, pensando no espaço da sala de aula. De uma sociedade que tinha características importantes, né? E ele pensou na humanidade, né? No sujeito humano, fazendo isso sobre a cultura da época, sobre os desenvolvimentos da sociedade para a época e a forma como ele recebia isso. Foram algumas coisas que eu percebi sobre as escritas de Vygotsky, e penso que foi muito importante, né? Lógico que o termo, né, do termo ser defeituoso parecia assim como um problema, mas não era assim como ele enxergava. Então, por mais que ele usasse essa palavra, ele tinha uma perspectiva diferente sobre isso, com essa mudança, com as mudanças que ele proporcionou e as práticas de olhar o sujeito dentro dessa sociedade, do sujeito surdo, né, do cego e tal.
All right.
And I'd be happy to share what I've written in the last 10 years with anyone who wants to write me. Almost everything has a PDF link to it, and so if you can read English,
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to share.
Okay, so Elias kept on saying about the importance of Vygotsky's development of his, not Vygotsky's development, but his ideas, the development of his ideas in his time concerning the perspective and the strategies he used to understand Russian schools by opportunities and the experience students could take. If I make some mistake, please correct me, guys. Elias also says that from his studies, he found out information that show that he didn't have a ready-made point about the notion of inclusion, but he developed this notion to the classroom, thinking about humanity, think about human beings, culture and development. And then that's where he goes from with his writings. So again, defectology doesn't mean it's a problem or a defect. It's much more related to the perspectives, the deafs and or the blind could have about his own perspective as subjects in the world. Not a defect person, but a subject in the world.
And the one thing I would say is that this idea was, well, again, it was inherited from the Germans. It was filtered through Soviet ideology. And the promise of the Soviet Union was incredible. We're going to have a society with no social class differences. Everyone's going to be equal. It just didn't happen. You know, but these ideas were born of a time when a genuine commitment to equality was at least the ideal. It went south pretty fast. Vygotsky died in 1934, and at the end of his life, he was an outlaw. He was on Stalin's bad list, and because he wasn't orthodox enough in his beliefs. You know, you had, you know, the whole idea of the Soviet party line is real and was deadly. He died of an illness, but Mike Cole told me Vygotsky let himself die because he was, you know, it was either that or Siberia or the Gulag or one of, you know, work camp. And it, you know, he just saw that where everything was going. So again, but the optimism at the launch of the Soviet Union was extraordinary.
Peter, I don't know how to thank you. Vivi has lost her connection. She cannot speak. So
No.
You can?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
My connection 2 times just for us to stop stereotyping who has bad internet connection. So here in the United States, that happens quite often too, depending on the place where you live.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you again, Peter. It was such an insightful conversation, so much to learn, so much to unlearn. And I really appreciate your time and the time of my colleagues here also posing those questions. And we always ask kindly ask that if you have any time to address any of the questions that you'd like to address, but you didn't have an opportunity to do in here, you are welcome to write a response, and then we can send that to the colleague who asked the question.
And so I see some of you are inquiring about getting hold of some of the articles, and I'm always happy to share my email. Maybe Fernanda or Vivi can provide you with my email address, and I'm very prompt in responding. So I'm happy to share things, and if you or to continue the conversation with anyone who wants to follow up.
Oh, that is the best line ever, because we will always want to keep in touch. And in the name of our research group, as one of its leaders, I would like to thank you very much for accepting to come, for joining us for this conversation, for being so kind as to address our questions and answering them and discussing them with us. It's such a pleasure. We are very thankful for you. We are a research group that is always dedicated to thinking and rethinking and questioning. And it was a great opportunity with you because we had this great chance of talking. And I have to say that I loved that you expressed about yourself, because whenever I tell them that I am also obsessive and I also diagnose it the same way, and that's my reason for being very productive, people think that I am just joking, because I joke a lot. So it's great that you said that, because now they will realize that it's not only a joke, although I make fun of this, but that is also an issue. But we channel it to doing something that perhaps may be good. So I thank you very much for having shared this with us, and for being here, and for giving us the opportunity to reflect about so many issues. And I'm sure we will keep on reflecting about it, and this discussion will continue with us all. I would like to thank our interpreters, both the ones from Portuguese to sign language and from English to Portuguese, all the people who are here with us today, the organizers of these meetings, Viviane, Larissa, and some people who already needed to leave because they teach at 7, and our guest for next week, Paul, who is here with us. I'm very happy to see that you are here with us, and next week you are going to be talking with us as well. So thank you very much, and I hope that next week we can also meet again. And you, Peter, are always invited to come whenever you want to our meetings. It's a pleasure to have you also with us for the other meetings. So thank you very much. I will close our session on Facebook, but we will take our official picture. So bye, people on Facebook.
And if you have any final words that you would like to share, Peter, feel free.
Oh, just thank you, everybody, for being here. It's just such an honor to have people turn out and take an interest in these topics, and it's really it brings me joy.
Well, Peter, it is going to be put on YouTube, and this keeps being used. Sometimes a year later, people write to us about something that they just saw. So it's going to be, I mean, forever being used. Thank you very much. And I'm closing on Facebook.